upbeat note, I will go ahead and get started with this month's survival call. Not a big crowd here today, so if you have questions, feel free to type them in. I will manage to get to all of them because I won't have enough content to fill the hour without it. But if we get to the end and there's time left over and you're out of questions, well, then I'll give you some of your time back and you can get on with your week and get ready for your New Year's Eve activities tomorrow night. All right, a quick reminder on the Zoom, there's a Q&A box. If you've got a question, that's the best place to type it. I don't always see the chat box, but the Q&A box I do pay attention to, and I will answer your questions in as real time as I possibly can. So let me start off, as I always do, with what's kind of on my mind, and this is generally triggered by conversations and emails and maybe a blog post I've been writing or whatever, but I'll get on my soapbox for a little bit and talk about, well, apparently talk about pricing. I see two, let me back up here a little bit. I've got a white paper coming out on sales and marketing. Basically, it's all of my sales and marketing strategy rolled up into one bundle with a marketing plan template, which all of you on this call will be receiving. Everybody who's subscribed to the survival calls will get that as soon as it's ready, probably next week. Anybody who participated in the recent survey I put out will get it. I want you guys to have it. It's a labor of love, but there's some great stuff in there. And one of the things I talk about in marketing strategy is pricing. And many of us forget or don't realize that pricing is a function of marketing. I don't know what else it is a strategy, and pricing is a strategy, but it's part of your overall marketing strategy. And I see a couple of fails, and I see it in all the kinds of businesses I deal with. I see it with the integration groups, I see it with my distributors, and most of all, I see it with the rental and staging guys, the production rental guys, or any kind of rental-based company. And there's two primary types of fails that I encounter. And the first one is misplaced risk, and the second one is misplaced transparency. And I'll go into a little bit of detail about each one of these. But when I see misplaced risk, what I'm finding is I see businesses that are asking and maybe even getting high margins on very low risk services, but then they do some very high risk things and they're getting some very low margins on that. And the typical anecdote is the rental and staging company that decides to add content creation and production, which is very high risk, and they give it away or they charge below cost because they're trying to build that business. It's very counterintuitive, it's very dangerous, and it's one of the many pricing fails that we see. Transparency, misplaced transparency, and I've been preaching how we need to write scope of work proposals for well over a decade. I think I started doing it long before I was even consulting. The philosophy that if you write a detailed proposal, it proves that you know what you're doing, when in fact I think it proves exactly the opposite. And I'll use my my homeowner remodeling series of stories and anecdotes this year from having the bathroom remodel. I had a contractor who loved to tell me how detail oriented he was and how much he paid attention to the details, which turned out to be, well, not true. But I likened it to somebody showing me how they're going to hammer a nail, and what I really want you to show me is how it's going to look when it's finished. So don't tell me how to do it. So when we write proposals that basically talk about how we're going to hammer nails, that transparency is a pricing fail. So let's look at an example here. The risk one is fascinating. I've done this exercise with a couple of clients, and it's particularly relevant to the integration folks, where I see a lot of misplaced risk in systems integration. So what I've done here is I've created a chart based on a fictitious business where we take each of the revenue streams that they have, the sources of revenue. They have box sales, they have products that are going to be installed, they have the design for an installation, labor for installation, the accessories that go into the installation, and then we total all of that up. And for each one of these, they have a calculated margin or a margin that they've been applying to the cost. So for instance, they sell a cost of approximately $1 million in boxes every year, and they put a 25% margin on it, which means their net revenue is 1.3 million. So in integration in particular, you start from cost, you add margin to it, not markup, but margin, and get to a net revenue. So here we have basically a $9.7 million company with a blended margin based on each of these product groups. And what I noticed in all of this, of course, it always jumps out when they're not charging anything for design. And this particular company considers itself, prides itself on being a design build integrator, and they always say, and we don't chase bid work, even though that 50% of their work was bid work. But they say, yeah, we're design build, except they're not charging for design. They feel that they're paying for the design and the margins. But this analysis showed indeed that they were not. They were actually getting better margins on box sales than they were on an installed product, and in addition to giving away the free design. And their labor margins were very low, and a lot of that is probably attributable to, poor estimating, cost overruns, but it's high risk. That's why you've got to build more margin into it. And then accessories, which they felt like they couldn't make a lot of money on because they weren't integral and they weren't important pieces of the puzzle, even though every accessory was mission critical to making the project work. So I think this is an example of misplaced risk. And I said, well, let's consider for a moment that you need to be charging for design. And if you charge for design, people would value it more, in which case you could probably sell more design. Labor, you have a lot of risk in labor. You need to build some more margin into it. So what if we recast all of this? Because every time I talked about raising margin, they immediately responded with, well, then we won't win the job. And I said, tell you what if we can figure out how to do this and not change what you charge overall? And we did. We came through and we went through and figured out what's the right margin we should be trying to get for each of these items based on the risk, relative to each other. And we came up with this proposed, 22% on box sales, 12% on installed products, which freaked them out. But then I showed them that they were actually getting an average of 12% gross profit on their bid work overall. So, excuse me, my computer decided to do something I didn't ask it to do. Get back here. And putting in some design work. So based on selling the same amount of business, okay, you could have the exact same amount of revenue, but your margins are going to be overall higher. You're going to do better. And your margins are going to track with the risk for what you sell. So in other words, if you sell more labor, the margins are going to track with it and you'll make more money. And I said, this does not even take into account that, for instance, if you lower the margins on box sales, how much more box sales you would actually sell, or you could actually sell, which would actually raise the revenue. So this is a great exercise for you to go through and take a look at your margins by product line or line of business and see how you're actually doing. Now, misplaced transparency, and I mentioned a couple of places where I'm seeing it. One is in line item pricing, highly detailed proposals. That transparency automatically devalues what you do. Okay, that pulls the values down. I could go into the long psychological explanation of it, but I'm not a psychologist. But I can tell you that when you tell people exactly how much each thing costs, you're drawing scrutiny, and they expect a better price overall. The transparency forces them to ask more questions and negotiate more steadfastly. What line items do is they tell the customer how you're going to do things instead of what it is that you're going to actually do. I'm going to give you a finished bathroom to your taste. I'm going to do it a certain way is how. And the more line items you get, the more scrutiny you're going to have. I also see in line item pricing or transparency, this is how we sell with proposals. So if we use proposals to sell business, in other words, we don't do the positioning. Think about this past month's webinar on positioning. If you're relying on a proposal to sell for you, then you're putting transparency in a proposal that doesn't need to be there. You've got to leave a little bit of room for magic. So the less you have to put in a proposal, the more work you have to put into the relationship and the mutual understanding about what you're going to do, so the proposal summarizes that. So thank you, Matt, for asking a question. It says, Tom, you've encouraged us to eliminate equipment lists from our proposals. We've tried this multiple times, and each time the meeting planner, important point here, has come back to us requesting that list. One planner even told me she was insulted that we provided a narrative scope of work instead of the equipment list. All right. I'll read the rest of your question here. This is a positioning issue. So here we have you just gave us some examples of where we're not well positioned with the customers. Now let me finish what you've put here. Are we approaching this the wrong way? In other words, trying to do this on the wrong market segment? Yes, that's part of it. Do you have advice on how to respond to those requests other than by providing the equipment list? By the way, we provide segment and section pricing. And Matt, you type really quickly. That's a big question. All right. So meeting planners is a great example, because we're not necessarily dealing with the most educated buyer, and they rely on the transparency of the equipment list to help them feel like they're being more educated, so that they can compare proposals between buyers. So anybody who insists on having a detailed proposal, one, is either doing a comparison, or two, actually understands what it is that you do and wants to verify that you know what you said you know how to do. So first of all, you have to figure out, why do they want to see it? Meeting planner, it's probably because they need the transparency so they can compare your quote to someone else's. We would learn this in the positioning conversation and help them understand. Anytime I've taught putting together proposals, there's a certain type of buyer. This would be a meeting planner, what is typically a confidence control buyer, which is a scary combination. Confidence control buyer, you have to give them the detail, but you don't have to give them necessarily detailed pricing. So I would be interested if these meeting planners are coming back and asking for detailed pricing. And if they are, then clearly they're trying to compare you, they're trying to commoditize what you're doing with somebody else. My response is always, get them in your office. Help them understand why they need to trust you, and why the scope of work is a better solution for them. We haven't finished developing the relationship, in other words. So my advice is, get deeper into the segment, understand the segment a little bit better, and if they do need to have some detail, don't give them the detailed pricing, give them the equipment detail, and I usually put it in an addendum. I put in an accompanying document and said, here's the list of the equipment that we're going to send, and make them happy. Now, I also would tend to give them very generic lists and not specific product lists. You know, I'm gonna say I'm gonna give you a 24-channel digital audio mixer, rather than a specific make and model number. And if they want that level of detail, that's an opportunity to invite them into a conversation to develop a better relationship, get them into your building, engage the diamond effect, get out of that bow tie one-to-one relationship, and get that diamond conversation going so we can get down to the heart of this. So thanks for the question. Oh, look, and then I wrote a slide on positioning. You know, I should really put preview on my slides, and I would probably know what I'm going to say next. So positioning is the art of looking more valuable. I gave the story about my contractor telling me how he's going to hammer in a nail versus what it's going to look like when he's done. You know, that's what positioning does. If I have to tell you how that I'm going to hammer nails in straight, to me that's the same thing as giving them a detailed line item proposal with prices. There's something about there's no trust in the relationship that allows me to say, hey, you know what you're doing, I'm assuming the nails are going to be put in straight. Pricing, and we started all of this conversation with pricing. Pricing is science, positioning is art. pricing is about getting the most that I can without, leaving work on the table, whereas the buyer is doing the opposite. They're trying to not leave money on the table and get the best work out of you. Positioning eliminates the need for transparent pricing, and it's an art form. And it's part sales, it's part marketing, it's part business development, but it's definitely about having a good B2B relationship. Telling people that you're better doesn't make you worth more. And I look at a lot of marketing strategies and proposal strategies, and mostly they say, hey, we're better, which, it's too late. If you're having to say we're better in a proposal, then you haven't done the things, you haven't positioned yourself to actually win on anything other than price. So anytime you misplace the risk or the transparency, it's going to reduce your overall credibility. It looks like you don't know what you're doing. I'll give another consumer example. One of the reasons I hired the contractor I did, who I love complaining about, but he did some very good things. And one of the things he did well was how he budgeted the job for me. And his labor costs were higher than I anticipated. Basically, he figured out what it would cost to do the job. He kind of guessed at our taste, and he said, here's what the materials will probably cost you. But regardless of what the materials cost, here's the labor to put it in. And he stuck to that number. And that improved his credibility for me because this number was high. I think he'd considered a lot of, by the way factors, and he'd recognized a lot of the risk, and he wasn't trying to lowball me with a number. And that impressed me. That's one reason we went with him. And he stuck to the number. He delivered the finish that we asked for, though not always as painlessly as I would have liked. And in other words, he did good positioning, and he got the job. In a discussion about pricing and going back to if you're doing a marketing plan, special offers or promotions are part of a pricing plan or a pricing strategy. And people ask me, because I talk about it in marketing plans, but they ask me, what does that look like in my business? And I generally can point to something that they're already doing, which is a special offer or a promotion. And seasonal pricing is a special offer. It could be a promotion, but it's generally a special offer. If you're tying your pricing to something happening at a specific time, that's a special offer. Bonuses are a complement to something that you've already purchased. So when you say, if you do this, I will give you that, that's a bonus. Sometimes, and I hear this in live event companies saying, well, we do project management for free. Well, quit saying that. You need to start saying, if you hire us to do the job, we will do the project management for free. Now it's a bonus. Before it was a value add. Now it's a bonus. So why don't I hire somebody else and you do the project management for free? Yeah. We know what you meant, but change the wording on that. Incentives are a bonus with an expiration date, which we need to use more of in our businesses. It's a good until. Okay. Here's the bonus. I can include this, but we need your confirmation by this time. And when you give an expiration date, this is non-negotiable. There's a reason there's an expiration date. And if the client asks you to explain, well, why can't you give it to me after that date? You can say, because I incur costs after that date that make it impractical for me to do it. It's just business. So stick to it. Another type of special offer promotion that we all have or should have are terms and conditions. Okay? Sometimes they're not negotiable, but you can put special offers and promotions into your terms and conditions. Payment options, quick pay options are special, special offers. Sometimes they can be a bonus or an incentive. Matt asked, what are some good incentives you've seen in that live event companies use? Ones that I'm seeing that are effective, and again, it really depends on the customer. You would think that cash incentives to pay more up front would be, where you could save 10% if you pay me in advance kind of thing, would be practical. but surprisingly, they're not. So that's really an example of one that doesn't work. But one that does work is that if you give somebody terms, 50% down, discount net 30. 50% down means you pay me on confirmation or before load-in or whatever the night the deadline may be. The net 30, you base the discount on getting paid in net 30 terms. So the discount becomes an incentive. It has an expiration date. So that equipment discount goes away if you do not pay on time. In accounting terms, what you're going to do is invoice them for the entire amount, but if they pay by the due date, they could subtract the value of the discount. I've seen that work very well. Producers and other types of industry buyers will reject it out of hand because they want to do business on their terms. They're better at control than you are, so I don't always see that working. But the tying discounts to payment, I've seen work well, particularly with institutional buyers. The 3% quick pay, I find works well with institutional buyers, corporate buyers. Anybody who's going through an accounting department or a procurement department, they want that 3%. They're incentivized to do that, so I've seen that work very, very well. Confirm buy discounts, I've seen get some traction. I think some of these things that work have a life and have a season. And right now we're in there's a lot of work in the industry. The economy is fairly strong. There's a lot of demand, and you should have a fairly abundant pipeline. If you don't, call me. But you should have a fairly abundant pipeline, and you can convey this to your customers saying, I'm going to give you a quote. The quote's only good until this amount of time. So it's going to be good for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, which often is not enough time for the client to actually confirm. But you can give them an incentive that said, if you will confirm the job by this date, I'm going to give you an extra discount, which is an incentive. So giving them a confirmation discount or a confirmation bonus, I think can also work. You could also do it with an upgrade. Say if you'll confirm by this date and I can get it onto my calendar, I can give you this video projector upgrade or something like that. So hopefully those are some ideas you haven't thought of. All right, so having said all this, what can you do on Monday morning? So Monday morning, get into the office, look at your 2016 margins. Think of the chart that I showed you earlier. Look at your different lines of business, look at your different product groups, and look at the times of year and figure out what kind of margins that you are earning and what kind of gross profit expectations you're creating in the proposals during those time periods. Look for the patterns and see if they match what your actual strategic needs are. It would be, horrible to find out that the busiest time of the year where you have the most demand are your lowest margins. That tells me that there's something backwards in your pricing that needs to be addressed. You probably should have stuck to your guns a little bit more. You have high demand, you should be getting higher margins. I mean, granted, there's a bell curve of the margins that you're going to receive, but if you're underselling during busy periods, it'll show up in this analysis. And then with the information that you get, make a pricing change. Pick one important pricing change. You may have more, but pick one, do it. It's the beginning of the year. The more you play with pricing, the less scary it is. What I mean by this, I used to review pricing twice a year, and sometimes I would change as many as 10% of the items at that time. Sometimes I'd only change a handful of them. But the more you play with pricing, the less scary it is to change pricing. The more comfortable your sales team is with the dynamics of pricing. We learn to explain changes in pricing. Our clients quit expecting our prices to be identical year after year after year after year. Take that normalcy of that expectation away from them. Make some pricing changes. Most of you need to charge more for labor. I'll just make a blanket statement. Whatever you're charging for labor, charge 5% more, charge 10% more. You have a lot of risk in it. You're not getting the margins that you need. You are better than the people who you think you're trying to compete with on price. So, and if your customers don't understand that, it's because your salespeople don't understand it. Put some faith into your people skills and charge more for labor. So now, all right, so we got some questions from you guys. If you have any more questions on the whatever I just rambled about, feel free to type them in. I'm happy to go back and answer them. I did get a few questions from you guys. I don't know if it's anybody who's on the call because there's not many of you. We had a lot more people on the executive call, so I guess all the people who were in sales and marketing took this week off. Here's a question on negotiating, final negotiation. And it was written with one salesperson in particular, and we all have that sales guy, don't we? With one salesperson in particular, customers look at the proposal price and then respond with their own number that we are supposed to agree with. I don't see how to break the cycle without pissing off customers. All right, I'm going to read between the lines here. It's one salesperson in particular. It sounds to me like he's trained his customers to come back at him with a price that he will agree to and close the deal. So he's creating the appearance that he's closing the deal, and he's using, one of the negotiating tools that I teach is the counter close. As soon as the client puts up a counter, if you can close immediately, accept the counter, and they're taking the counter close and they've made it just part of how they work with the client, and they've trained the client to do that. I watch shows like Pawn Stars and American Pickers where people negotiate, and sometimes it's pretty pathetic because they've already done the deal and then they're redoing it for the camera. But you'll see somebody throw out a price knowing that the other person is going to counter, and they're simply going to agree to it or meet in the middle. That sounds like that's what's going on. But I've got some thoughts about this because we've created an expectation in the customer. And yeah, the person asking the question is correct. We don't want to piss off customers. So here's the basics about negotiations as it applies to this situation. And we've got to instill this in our salespeople. We have to help them do it. This is uncomfortable for many of them because they're not really professional salespeople. They're order takers, and they're going to take the path of least resistance. The rule of thumb is that if you're going to negotiate and the client wants a lower price, just reduce the scope. If you will build things into your budget that you can trade out, and it's in there specifically so you have something to trade out, that will help you in this. That's part of negotiation. Put something in there that maybe costs you money but the client doesn't really care about, so that you can reduce the scope, not really change what's important to the customer, and get to the price. It's a perfectly valid trick. Put something in you can take out. The other thing you can do is know what you can say yes to. And on the executive call, we spend a lot of time talking about job cost analysis. And in any pricing discussion, we need to have some way of analyzing the projects we put together, the proposals that we build, for their profitability, and have an understanding of what we can say yes to. In other words, what can we say no to? So some sort of job cost analysis has got to tell you that, hey, I'm at 35% gross profit. I need to be at 40%. Let me put some profit back in so I have a little bit of room to negotiate. Sometimes putting something in you can take out is about putting margin in that you might have a chance to take out and close the deal. So back to the original question, at this particular salesperson, if we can get him or her to put more margin into their jobs, the client's counter number will be higher. So raise your first number, raise your first pass, so that when the client counters, it's closer to the number that you're willing to live with. That's one way of getting the margin you need. You're not changing behaviors other than starting with a higher number, changing your salesman's behavior. The client's going to continue to do the same thing, but we're going to get the higher margin out of it, which is really what we're trying to do. Some language on negotiating. Sometimes we don't negotiate because we don't know what to say when the client gives us a counter price or a counter proposal. Here's some simple responses that you can use. That seems reasonable. Are you in a position to make this decision now? So when the client, this is a pricing adjustment response. So if the client says, yeah, I know your proposal looks great. We really didn't have $70,000 in the budget, but we could do $65,000. Okay, you need a response that one, you need to acknowledge the fact that they're willing to close at a number that they've just put on the table, but you also have to confirm that they're willing to make the decision right now, because what happens is we say, yeah, I think I can probably do that. And now you've just given them a $65,000 quote without changing anything, without getting the confirmation. And then the client says, well, good. So great, I'll put $65,000 down here, and we'll go look at the other proposals and get back to you in a couple of weeks. You just failed at negotiation. So ask the question, are you in a position to make this decision now? And they say, no, we still have to go through our approval process. Then you know you need to take a different negotiating tack, because that one's out. A terms and conditions approach, and again, this is also on when you know you're going to do the work. If you say, if this is what you need, then let's look at how to get you closer to what you want to pay. So we don't agree to the $65,000, but we say, let's look at what we can do to get you closer. Sometimes if you apply the terms and conditions you've already put in front of them, you'll actually get them to the price. You say, it's already built in here. If you'll pay 50% up front and 50% net 30, instead of doing the whole job net 45 like you normally do, I can give you the job for $65,000. So a lot of times it's already built in. Sometimes you need to stall. It's the car salesman. I need to go talk to the manager about that. Use your words, but my words might sound something like, I've got some leeway if you're going to make an immediate decision, but I don't want to add drama to the discussion. When you know that they're not going to make a decision, when you know that you're in a competitive bidding process, and any price adjustment you make verbally, you're going to have to commit to without any concession from the buyer, use something to stall. And if nothing else, you'll get some more information about their decision-making process. Okay. Always let them know, I've got some leeway if you're making an immediate decision, but clearly you're not going to make an immediate decision. So let's don't create that drama if we don't need to. Now you can introduce a different negotiating tactic. And then the fourth one I put in here is a fit and finish response. It's when you give them the $70,000 quote and they tell you that you have $65,000, and they're saying, well, we're seeing some other quotes for around 60, but we like what you're doing. We could probably go 65,000. And you could say, well, we all price a little bit differently, and our clients all decide a little bit differently. If you can help me understand what your decision criteria are aside from price, then maybe I can make some adjustments that will get us there. And this is typically a fit and finish question. If we build our proposal for negotiating, we've probably put some additional fit or some additional finish in there that the client is willing to give up. And it might be something really simple like, if we just drop the screen surround, or if we just change the type of projection that we're using, your audience is not going to know. The image is always, it's not going to be as good, but it's better than what you actually need. Help them make the decision to get to the price that you want to do. So there's some negotiating language options. Let's see, some more on this question. One-to-one sales to client relationships compromise your value proposition. So going back to the issue of the single salesperson, the customer manipulating them to a target price that of their choosing, fix the bow tie. Straighten out your bow tie, get the diamond effect, get more people involved in the conversation, make the conversation more transparent. so that you can get the value out of the job that you actually need to get out of it, or the value out of the customer relationship. If you have responsible salespeople, and I'm assuming you all do, maybe a stretch, you can give them a negotiating range so they can always have a counter proposal with a closing statement. So rather than the negotiation ending when the client says 65,000 counter to your 70,000, if you give your salesperson a range saying you can, as long as you close above 68,000 or 67.5, we're okay. Let them have something they can agree to, which also means that there's a number that they can't agree to without going and talking to somebody else. So if the client is really ready to close, then they will probably accept your counter to their counter. And finally, you've got to be willing to lose business. That's negotiation 101. If you're not prepared to walk away from a job, then you are not in position to negotiate. It's another reason why having multiple people involved in the conversation is valuable and important, because we have strength in numbers. We're braver together than we are one-on-one. So don't change price without changing the scope or terms. All quotes need terms and conditions with expiration dates and next steps. Get that into your proposals, and then figure out what's really important for the client. Do they want a lower price, or do they simply want the perception of a good deal? And sometimes the idea that they're getting a good deal, a simple negotiation, give them 5%. That's all it takes to get the job done. Man, I had a whole lot to say on this subject. Best practices, options and proposals. Watch the webinar on proposal writing. I talk about options. I don't know if I talked about this on the last phone call or when this happened, but I had one of my clients who's optioning and proposals, and he sent me a great success story. I think it was I talked about it at the webinar. I can't tell you how happy I am with the results with optioning and proposals. We're having better conversations with customers. We're making it easier for them to find their choice, and it also helps us cover up our own mistakes and understanding, because the whole process of figuring out what options to offer means we have to uncover a lot of market intelligence that we've learned along the way from this particular customer. Okay? And many of you who are in my advisory programs know that I really encourage to let I like seeing the boss, the owner, the CEO, somebody very, very important, negotiate with difficult clients. Sometimes clients are difficult to salespeople because they can get away with it. But when they're talking to a peer, it's a little bit more difficult. So get the boss into the negotiation. You'll find it goes much, much better. And of course, learn to say no. And oh my God, if the salesperson reports that the customer is only buying on price, call the customer right now. Stop what you're doing. Call the customer yourself. Find out what the real issue is. When salespeople say the customer is only buying on price, okay, that scares me. One, it might be true, which scares me, and I need to verify it. Two, it's often, and what I call stupid salesman tricks, it's often a technique that a salesman uses to shut down your objections to the things that they should have done. In other words, they're just taking a shortcut saying the customer's buying on price, give me a good price so I can go close the deal. It's important that we intervene as quickly as possible on this. So call the customer yourself, find out what the real issue is. Very often we're discovering that the customer isn't buying on price. We just have a salesperson who's not listening well. And it gives you a chance, because now you're in the conversation, to test alternatives to price shopping. Say, well, help me understand, you're telling me price is real important. I'm giving you some ways to alter your price in the terms and conditions. Help me understand why that doesn't appeal to you, and find out what the real issue is on the buyer's side. This is also a way of opening up that diamond relationship and finding out some great information. Well, that was a long, rambling answer to a question. If you have other questions you'd rather hear answered, please type them in. I'll get to them. We had another question from somebody who attended the Jumpstart Live workshop here a few weeks ago. Going over my notes, I have a quick question on retail pricing. Do you suggest the retail price of owned equipment should be the cost of sub-renting that item, or am I misunderstanding my notes? In some cases, yes, that is correct. Your cost is the cost of sub-renting the item, but more accurately, your cost is the replacement cost. And sometimes what you can get in a sub-rental is not the same as your replacement cost. For instance, there's that one guy who has an extra digital console in his garage and he'll rent it to you, or it comes out of his band gear, and it's not something that you can get all the time. It's not an accurate replacement cost. It's not the right price to use for calculating what your costs are. So yes, in general, it is based on your sub-rental costs, but it's what you can consistently sub-rent it for. Now, retail pricing in general, just a reminder, it is based on market rates, and your market rates are based on wholesale rates. So really, retail is a product of wholesale, and we all have different wholesale rates. So we all have different buying power, and I'll talk about that, I think, in the next slide. So my best practice, my rule of thumb is, set retail at 2 times the wholesale rate for production rental. So if you're a high-tech rental company, your general retail rate is twice what the wholesale rate is. Lower tech items have a lower factor. In other words, something's fairly commoditized, like a projection screen. It's going to be less than the 2 times the wholesale rate. It might be 1.6, but you can still discount that price and make a little bit money on it. There's no hard and fast rule. There's a lot of wiggly rules. Okay. I got a comment here in the chats. How important is comparison shopping your competitors' pricing when negotiating in the current market? Thank you. That's a great question. My knee-jerk answer to that is I don't care what my competitors do. I seriously don't. I know some of you think it's very, very important to pay attention to what competitors are doing and adjust your response accordingly. I think it's noisy. I think it's unnecessary. I think pay attention to the customer that's in front of you and how you run your business. Now, having said that, if you're in a highly competitive environment, you do have to give some consideration to the marketplace, but I would really focus on making sure that I'm rising above the competition in terms of my value proposition. And that would be much better energy spent than trying to figure out how to massage my pricing to match what everybody else is doing or compare with what everyone else is doing. So in terms of pricing, your best practice will result that you're not going to lose money if you're using normal discounts and you end up having to sub-rent from a normal source. I say it all the time, sub-rentals are not an issue. Sub-rentals are not bad. They are not evil. They are not the enemy. If you need to sub-rent equipment, that's a good thing. That means that you're selling beyond capacity. It means you have a good idea of what equipment you need to buy in the future, and you're not going to lose money. It's just simply money that you weren't going to earn in the first place. So figuring out pricing is important. Let's see. Sorry. Now, the concern that I get sometimes that if everybody listens to Tom and everybody does what Tom says, we're all going to have the same prices. And this is not true. This is not true at all. I see lots of people's price lists, and you guys are all very competitive, but your prices do not line up at all. And the reason is you have different wholesale rates. Even in the same marketplace, you're going to have different wholesale rates because you have different buying power with your suppliers. You have different negotiating skills. If you're national and you're in different regions, your buying power or your pricing is going to be quite different. If you have a high expertise in an area, you're going to actually buy at a better price than someone who has low expertise in an area. So you'll be amazed at how different and varied all of your pricing will be, even in the same market. When in my old job, when we were bought by a much larger company, and we had a relationship with a large three-lettered wholesale rental supplier, and found out that on many important items we had a better price than what our new parent company had, who literally probably rented 50 times as much as we did. Part of that in negotiations was negotiation skill, part of that was expertise, and part of it was the buying power that we had through building the relationship with our suppliers. So your pricing won't all be the same, but you do need to go through the exercise. Thanks for that question, by the way. Stories. You talk about telling stories. Is it self-serving to include case studies to tell stories in a presentation, or do you suggest a more organic approach? Okay, so in a presentation, I'm guessing we're talking about kind of a pitch situation. That's not an inappropriate place for a case study. But if it's an opportunity to have an organic conversation, to have a conversation instead of a presentation, then case studies are often somewhat inappropriate. So let's talk about the difference between case studies and anecdotes. That might be a good place to go with this, which is really the difference between business development and marketing. So business development is about sharing an anecdote. Marketing is about a case study. It's the difference between conversation versus telling. It's an anecdote versus a fable. It's an element versus the essence. And a good story will deliver an element of information. Okay, a case study is going to talk about the essence of your organization. So there's, one's kind of a pinpoint message, and one's a very broad stroke. So language is important. And I talk about stories in the webinar, Language of Outcomes. If you're trying to reference where this has come up before, go take a look at that. And I tell a lot of stories, and I like to tell some pretty short ones, and I have a few long ones. But what's in a story? Most of them are brief. Pithy and amusing is good. People will listen to a story that's a little bit funny, maybe self-effacing in some way. Humble is always nice. You set the situation up, you introduce a conflict, and you resolve the situation. Bing, bang, boom. That's all there is. It doesn't have to be a hero story. We don't have to have fireworks at the end. It's just a very simple lesson that illustrates a minor point of some sort, the element of something. The story I use all the time, and talking about responsiveness in organizations, somebody's ask about, what happens if I have a problem on a weekend? So, well, let me tell you a story. We had an incident with a few weekends ago with a young man who'd been with the company for just a month or two, and it was his first weekend to be on call in the warehouse, and so he was working in the warehouse by himself, and one of our good clients got past, went around the phone system and called a back line, which they knew would ring in the office, hoping to find, one of the owners or a salesperson there to help them out, rather than going through the on-call system. And the young man answered the phone and found himself talking to a very important client who had a problem that needed to be solved. And so he put the client on hold and said, let me find out for you. And he called the on-call person, which happened to be me, which is why I tell the story. And rather than, he wanted me to transfer the call to me and take over the situation. And I said, that's not the way we work. The way we work is you're going to solve the problem for a client. So he's asking for this, you're going to do this. So get back on the phone, tell him yes, tell him you're going to take the item to the airport, you're going to ship it to him, you're going to call him, give him the flight information, tell him where he can pick it up. And then when it's all done, call me back and let me know that you did it. And the lesson of the story is that we empower our people to do these things, because if we don't let them do these things, if we don't let them engage with clients, how are clients going to be confident that the entire organization stands behind them and wants to help them out? That's a story. Okay, wasn't the most amusing story in the world, but hey, I'm great in person. So, hey, that's all the stuff that I had questions sent in for. If you've got any more questions, this would be a great time to ask one. I'm going to take a sip of my coffee and give you a moment to type something in. I know you're thinking of something. No, well, that's when we have the opportunity to give you a little time back. I'll do a little bit of self-marketing here at the end because, well, it's my webinar. I get to do that. I have started a trusted advisor program. Jack raised a hand. Jack, do you have a question? If so, raise your hand again and I'll call on you. Nope, thank you. Happy to have a question. I sent in a question. Stand by. Okay. I'll let you finish typing your question. I'll keep talking. So I've got a one-on-one coaching program, a trusted advisor program, where we work on everything you want to work on, just you and me. If that's something that you need for your business, give me a call, and I'll talk to you about how that works. And looking for different ways to help more people, often very remotely. A lot of people don't have the kind of money or the time to have me come visit their office, so I'm finding more ways to work with you. And so I'm waiting for, he says, I sent in a question, stand by, I will copy it here. I'll answer your question if it will show up. Or you put it in the Q&A box. I don't know how you sent the question in. I can't find the, oh, you sent it by email. Well, there you go. I'm not even looking at email. All right. So on that awkward note, why don't we call this a wrap? If you've got more questions, just send them to me, and I'll try and answer them offline or save them for next month's call. Look forward to having you all back. So thank you for being with me on this holiday week. Happy New Year to everyone. Let's have a fantastic 2017, and go get them. Cheers. Bye-bye.